Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to the program. It's Burn It Down with Kim Brown. So excited to be with you on this good Friday the 13th. Yes, indeed, it is Friday the 13th. And yes, shit is a little scary out here in these United States, because if you thought Trump was through, cue the coup. And I don't use the word coup lightly, people, because we truthfully don't know what's going to happen with Donald Trump. We don't know if Trump's leaving. We don't know if he's packing his things. We don't know if Barron is transferring to, the private school down there near Mar-a-Lago. It's very uncertain. Things are quite definitely up in the air. And, despite the increasing calls from some Republicans, not all, to have Donald Trump publicly concede the election to Joe Biden, a lot of the Trump administration's moves indicate that they ain't going nowhere. And I'm talking about from the Department of Defense to the State Department. All indications show that Donald Trump and his minions are buckling in for a fight. So what does that potentially mean for everybody else? You and I, the people of this country who are suffering and struggling with COVID, with unemployment, with a myriad of things. Congress not doing much, apparently, to help the situation that we find ourselves in, at least until the next Congress is sworn in January. So we're kind of in a very odd holding pattern right now. So we're going to talk about what's the potential for an actual coup if the Trump administration decides to make a full-on power grab, seize power, and put us in a constitutional crisis. Also, if we are indeed looking at a coup on American soil, a bloodless coup at this point, it won't be the first one. Back in 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, a mob of racist, violent whites came and overthrew the mixed race elected town government there in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was bloody. Lots of people died. Black people were murdered as a result of this coup, this uprising that happened on American soil. We're going to be speaking with author Blake Hill Saya and documentarian Christopher Everett, who have so much information and historical context to talk to us about this very important, though lesser known cataclysmic sort of event that was hastened by racial hatred in America. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. We definitely want you to stick around for that. So thank you to everyone that is tuning in and watching us. Don't forget to go to our own YouTube channel, Burn It Down with Kim Brown, like and subscribe. We would certainly appreciate it. But now it's time to start the show with two of our favorite guests. We love these gentlemen, two pieces, because they tell it exactly how it is and they're funny as shit to boot. Marcus Ferrell is joining us today from the dirty South. Now, if you don't know Marcus, look at his face. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him. He was in charge of Black outreach for Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. Marcus is also a political consultant and host of the show Clickbaity, the Political Thirst Trap. And I believe it airs on Facebook every morning. So y'all need to check out what Marcus and them is over there doing. Hello to Marcus. And of course, we're joined with Taure Brown. Taure is a sociology and anthropology PhD. No, are you studying for your PhD, Taure? Or are you just in school? What are you doing?
No, I'm getting my PhD.
Yes, he's a super smart brother. Of course, that's why we have him on the program, all the way from North Carolina. So we are very excited to have them both join us, y'all. Thank y'all for being here very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yo, happy to be here.
All right. Now, listen, y'all, this Trump shit is so crazy. I'm not even sure where to start. Actually, let's start with V1, Dwayne. So this was the signal to me, the big red flare in the sky that showed me that Trump and them are not play pimping. They is for real pimping about this coup scenario. Let's go to V1, Dwayne.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. All right, we're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today successful today and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, a minute afternoon, will also be successful. I went through a transition on the front, and I've been on the other side of this. I'm very confident that we will do all the things that are necessary to make sure that the government, the United States government, will continue to perform its national security function as we go forward.
So you believe there's widespread voter fraud, that the reports that we're getting from Pennsylvania, from Michigan, showing vote totals in massive leads or significant leads with 99% reporting are going to be overturned, and that the United States failed to conduct a fraudulent free election?
Rich, I'm the Secretary of State. I'm getting calls from all across the world. These people are watching our election. They understand that we have a legal process. They understand that this takes time, right? It took us 37 plus days in an election back in 2000. We conducted a successful transition then. I'm very confident that we will count, and we must count every legal vote. We must make sure that any vote that wasn't lawful ought not be counted. That dilutes your vote if it's done improperly. Got to get that right. When we get it right, we'll get it right. We're in good shape.
Should foreign leaders not be calling
We're in good shape.
President-elect Biden?
Who was next?
Holy shit. Marcus?
I wonder if that guy had pants on underneath that podium. Because he capping.
Marcus, you're first.
Listen.
Hold
Yeah,
on.
listen.
Like, listen. When it comes from the State Department, like, this is not Stephen Miller in the Rose Garden, right? This is not Don Jr. on Fox News talking about we getting ready for a second Trump administration. This is Mike fucking Pompeo. He is the Secretary of State. He is in the State Department delegitimizing the election of Joe Biden and then going on to talk about legal and illegal votes. Sir, does this alarm you?
This is more than alarming. I think fundamentally this is the issue of how white supremacy still is undefeated. Because in an election where more black and brown people have turned out in the history of America, and an election where, you know, the majority, that's 50+1 of white voters in America voted, and Trump still lost. The majority of white Americans voted for Donald Trump. And I'm not blaming all white folks, but what I am saying is Pompeo has to delegitimize a legitimate victory. And the reason why he has to do that is because people of color are still criminalized even when they're doing their civic duty. So it's an easy argument for these guys, even though it's an illegitimate argument. Look, this afternoon, Georgia officially called it for Joe Biden. And they're going to do a hand recount, and it's the same thing that they're trying to do in Arizona. And these secretaries of state across the nation, not in Arizona because we have a Democrat Secretary of State, but these secretaries of state across the nation are doubling down if they're a Republican, manning down, locking down the hatch, so to speak, just to make sure that they can do Trump's bidding. These guys have lost. They've known they lost. I think there's going to be a breaking point. Maybe that's Thanksgiving. Maybe that's right around Christmas, where it becomes so problematic that they're going to delegitimize the Republican Party forever. And considering the fact that Georgia has 2 Senate races going on that are Democratic Senate races, they know that they could actually compromise the results of a future Republican-led Senate by their tangible actions. And maybe they don't care. Maybe they will just want to burn the whole thing down. But I mean, the further they go, eventually they're going to have to take off. And they can't fire enough people to make foreign countries not pressure America enough to do the right thing by their voters.
Taure, in addition to what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, there have been a number of reports coming from the Department of Defense that long-term, careerists, people who work over there at the Pentagon are being forced out, including the secretary over there, Mr. Esper. Trump was trying to clown him, call him Yesper, which I thought was funny. But being replaced with Trump loyalists, when Marcus talks about, sometimes they would rather burn it down than lose, does that appear like what the Trump people are actually trying to do? Because we know Trump doesn't really give a care about the Republican Party or about America. He's interested in his own self-preservation and self-enrichment. Is he going to burn the whole so-called democracy to the floor before he concedes defeat?
Well, he can't burn something that doesn't exist in the first place. But to think about it, no, I'm not really concerned about it. the U.S. ruling class, the people who really control things, they've decided that Joe Biden is the better person to manage the U.S. empire. I'm not nervous about Mike Pompeo getting on TV and lying, because Mike Pompeo gets on TV every day and lies. I mean, that's his job as the U.S. State. So the idea that he's getting calls from all across the country is just laughable. The only person that maybe called him was, Bolsonaro over in Brazil. And he was basically saying, well, how are you deciding to pack your bags, right? He knows he's out of a job, like Marcus says. And I think this is just what I think is important to think about now is this small section left of the ruling class that does support Trump, right? And I'm not talking about the population, the 70 million people who voted for him. I'm talking about the powers that can be that Trump answers to, who interests that he speaks to. What they can do is use this process to hold out to get more concessions for their side. So that, it's like, it's the argument, well, if you want me to concede, these are the things you have to agree not to do or to do. And it seems like Joe Biden is already signaling that he's willing to do some things as far as let's reach across the aisle, the calls for unity and everything like that. But does Trump have the organized power to actually, overthrow the whole section of the ruling class that has gotten behind Trump? And when I say that, I'm talking about Wall Street, big tech, all these other kind of forces that have got behind Biden. Does Trump have that organized power to get over them? No, he does not, and he doesn't have it in the world scene either. So he has really no juice left. Like, that's not to say that he's not scary, but I think maybe the important thing to think about is what happens when somebody else comes along who's more articulate, more smooth, and then you can see the holes in the electoral process that they can use to challenge an election. What happens when it's that kind of shaky? So that's maybe important to think about.
Let me tell you who Trump still has juice with: the cops. And that's what the sort of conspiracy theory part of my brain goes to here. Like, would the police mobilize in support of Trump? Could we see a cops versus military kind of standoff? And y'all, I'm not trafficking in conspiracy theories, so don't hop in the comments talk about Kim's fanning the flame. No. I'm just saying, we have seen so much happen over the past 4 years. I can't really rule anything out. And pop up T2 for me, if you could, Dwayne. Taure, you raise an excellent point, because a lot of the long time, Washington insiders are so shook by Trump's lack of decorum and what his administration has meant largely. Bill Kristol, we know who he is. He's a conservative reporter, columnist, etc. He, in this Twitter thread, he notes at the beginning part of the Twitter thread that he had been in a conversation with someone from the Department of Defense, and they said, from what it's worth, his takeaway from last night's conversation with recent DOD senior officials, DOD under Mark Esper has pushed back more than many people realize against Trump's ideas, ranging from the use of troops here at home to Afghan withdrawal to military options regarding Iran. But this next tweet in the thread, or a little further down the thread, is kind of what's puzzling. What's the next tweet? I'm sorry, Dwayne. I don't have my list up right now. I'm gonna have to find it. There we go. Oh, okay. Well, give me the next one, because this is not really the one I want. But I kind of wanted the fourth tweet. Yes, that's nice. Chris Meir. Yes. Okay. Yes. Again, one more. There we go. A sign of the loyalty oath atmosphere now at Department of Defense. When Jim Anderson was fired yesterday as acting undersecretary for policy, he was giving a clap out as he left the building. The White House called to request the names of any political appointees who joined in so they could be fired. That is interesting. That is some gangsta shit. Get their names. If they was clapping, if they was showing Jimmy any love, we want to know who they are and put their names on a list. But Dwayne, I want to go to this video, but just to give you an idea of the ridiculousness and the sort of levels of absurdity that we're dealing with. Earlier in the week, Laura Ingraham on the Ingraham angle, Fox News, had a guest who appeared in shadow, who appeared in silhouette, who claimed to be a Nevada elections official, but the voice sounded mighty familiar. Let's take a listen.
Thank you for joining us. You saw something suspicious, we're going to get right into it tonight, happening on the side of a Biden-Harris van in the parking lot of the polling station. Now, walk the audience through what happened.
I'm not going to say which party does it, but thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think you're going to win. And I'm not going to stand for it. Our voting system, first of all, we should have voter ID. When you vote, you should have voter ID. And if you send something in, you should be sure, as a state and as a country, you should be sure that that vote is meaningful and it's not just made fraudulently, because there's a lot of fraudulent voting going on in this country. This country should have voter ID.
This motherfucker bored. Hey, yo, his silhouette was orange.
I mean, Marcus, didn't really think. I mean, were we not supposed to figure out who that was talking in that exact cadence, hitting those exact talking points? Come on, man. Come on.
I want to give an Emmy, or at least nominate an Emmy, to the producer who got Trump to go under darkness, and still, and you know how we know it was him, because he did this. Like he does that a lot, right? Like he when he gets his points across, and he talks like this right here, and he's talking about how messed up black people are voting and Mexicans are voting. Then we need to listen. This guy is, first off, this guy is so unhinged right now that a sitting president went undercover. Like he's a sitting guy for America right now, and he's unhinged, man. Like, so if they couldn't even find another actor, right? Like he didn't have to do that, but more importantly, the proof has not been justified, whether it was Trump or not. The proof just hasn't been justified across the nation. It's been a bunch of conspiracy theories. I look at Maricopa County, at the county recorder's office, when a news truck was getting equipment out of their news truck. Just it literally was a boxed up tripod fold out that they were getting out of the van. And all the Trump supporters went over there and said, "Look, they're stealing ballots. They're inserting something." I mean, the argument didn't make sense. But I mean, at this point, when you're grasping at straws, and you've lived a whole 3.5, 4 years built under a conspiracy theory that everybody's out to take what's from you and not taking accountability for any goddamn thing, then this is what you get. I mean, I gotta say something, Malcolm X, man, the chickens are coming home to roost right now, aren't they?
Speaking of coming home to roost, Dwayne, pop up that T3 for me real fast, if you don't mind. Oh boy. If you didn't think it was over, you thought it was over? Nah, it ain't over. The Million MAGA March and Stop the Steal are planning to rally at Freedom Plaza right here in Washington, D.C., 14th Street at noon on Saturday, baby. Then march to the Supreme Court. Mayor Muriel Bowser told reporters that D.C. police are monitoring caravans of Trump supporters who are reportedly headed from Texas to D.C. That's from NBC4's Shamari Stone. Next tweet, Dwayne, please. But Trump is well aware of this planned rally, and Trump was tweeting this today, y'all. He said, "It's heartwarming to see all of the tremendous support out there, especially the organic rallies." That means they're not organic. If he said they're organic, that means they are absolutely astroturf. Especially the organic rallies that are springing up all over the country, including the big one Saturday in D.C. I may even try to stop by and say hello. This election was rigged from Dominion all the way up and down. He sent that this afternoon at 1:35 in the p.m. But if you're wondering what Democrats are doing, here's what Senate Democrats have been busy doing on the Hill. Just in, this is from Senator Dianne Feinstein. The Senate passed 2 resolutions that Senator Kamala Harris and I introduced, congratulating the Lakers and the Dodgers on bringing championships back to Los Angeles. Under unprecedented circumstances, these teams went all the way. Congratulations. Now, Senator Dianne Feinstein had no embarrassment tweeting that. While the coronavirus is spiking out of control across the nation, we are seeing hospitalizations, people being intubated at record levels, and this is what the Senate Democrats are up to. But they didn't stop there. House Majority Whip James Clyburn from South Carolina, who many are crediting for giving Joe Biden the nudge his campaign needed in order for him to soundly defeat Bernie Sanders and become the nominee. He's been making the rounds, mad about progressives, mad about defund the police. He was on Meet the Press, and he also spoke with another journalist. I have to look up her name, but check out this clip real quick.
We've heard the reports that there was sort of a call with the Democratic conference last week, and some of the more centrist Democrats that survived but barely complained about the socialism label, the phrase defund the police. You were somebody, I remember the day you came on this show and said, let me tell you something about that phrase, defund the police, and you were very aggressive pushing back on it. But do you think that did cost you House seats, the socialism label, particularly in South Florida, those 2 seats, and defund the police?
Well, I don't know about all the seats. I've talked to people down in South Florida that told me that really was a problem down there. But I can tell you about the 1st Congressional District of South Carolina. I really believe that's what cost Joe Cunningham his seat. And I can also tell you about the Senate here in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. Jamie Harrison started to plateau when defund the police showed up with a caption on TV right across his head. That stuff hurt Jamie. And that's why I spoke out against it a long time ago. Right. I've always said that these headlines can kill a political effort.
Curious what you make of the fact of the House seats that you lost and why that happened.
Well, it happened simply because we were not able to discipline ourselves according to voter sentiment. We keep making that mistake, this foolishness about you got to be this progressive or that progressive. That phrase, defund the police, cost Jamie Harrison tremendously. Now, I'm not saying it was the only problem.
You sound kind of mad, Congressman. It sounds like you're blaming the more progressive members of your party for holding folks accountable or to a standard that doesn't work in their district. Do you blame the progressive members?
No, I don't blame progressive members. I want everybody in my caucus to be as practical as I am. That's the difference here. How are you going to look at me and say I'm not progressive? This foolishness about you more progressive than I am, that's poppycock, and I'm not going to listen to it.
Poppycock. Who the fuck says poppycock?
How you gonna look at me and say I's not progressives? How's you going?
Man, you know AOC got to go to work with this dude every day, right? Like, you know what I mean? Imagine that, right? You know what I'm talking about? But Kim, I got to say something.
Oh, go ahead. Be quick, because Tori's been nice and been quiet.
Tori, go ahead, Tori. You got it.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
Listen, man, first off, number one, James Clyburn has no place to say that because statistically, all the candidates, except for one basically, who ran for Congress and was pushing progressive issues, won. It was the neoliberals who didn't push any progressive issues who lost the most seats. That's a factual thing. Number two, when you say defund the police, and I brought this up on Twitter and it kind of went viral, but when you say defund the police, it's not a socialist idea. It's not a progressive socialist idea. If white folks were saying it would be considered libertarian, right? Small government.
Yes, I would agree. Tori, just real quick. So when we hear James Clyburn really get in his feelings and talk and really point the finger at some of the congressional losses, blaming it on progressives. You know, he doesn't like labels. How you gonna say I'm not progressive, this, that, and the third. But at the same time, you know, these are the people who are supposed to be working with Republicans, who many of whom have not acknowledged that the Democratic nominee for president actually won. And Joe Biden is going in with the expectation that he is going to not only name Republicans to his cabinet, perhaps, but really walking in with this very open bipartisan attitude and really resenting a lot of the issues raised from the side of the left, as expressed by James Clyburn, this real contempt for progressivism and issues like defund the police. How are the Democrats going to fight Trump and the Republicans if they act like a bunch of biatches like this on occasion? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, they're not going to fight Trump because that's not really what they're concerned about. You can see that as far as how easily he passed his military budget, how quickly he passed these judges through, whatever kind of resistance that they lobby. They're more pissed off. They did more to fight Bernie Sanders than they ever did to fight Donald Trump. And that's just factual, right? And that's because you can see the Democratic Party is beholden to the interest of capital. They are not interested in anything about the people as far as just to keep people from burning shit down. So, the Republicans and Democrats, their disagreement is on how much crumbs you have to throw to the masses to keep them from burning our shit down and taking our wealth that they make on the backs of the masses of people, right? So Clyburn is his job is always to kind of stand in and be the Negro whisperer, right? To talk down to folks, to confuse, to misinform, to bamboozle, to hoodwink, all those kind of things. Because if you have any tune ear to the streets, you understand that defund the police is the compromise. Most of us are saying abolish the police, which we're using the tactic of defunding the police to get people over, just in case you're not there yet. So if you ain't at abolish the police, at least you can agree that they got too much money right now, and we could use that money in other social programs that would actually help folks. That's the compromise. But where we're actually headed to, for the folks who got a radical analysis, who want to see and live in a better kind of society where we're not getting our heads shot off and beat down and locked up and all this other bullshit, want the police to be gone, abolished, done with. And we'll figure out some other ways how we can address our needs as far as emergency services, what happens when people get murdered, raped, and violent crime and all these other kind of things. We can figure that out too. But what we're saying right now is defund is the compromise. And Jim Clyburn, his time is up. It's slowly but surely up. They're on their last stand. And if you think that progressives are just going to roll around and support the Democratic Party and the next go, it's not going to happen. They're going to lose.
Dwayne, can you pop up that tweet from Jamal Bowman? I'm going to tell you which one it is in case you don't find it. It's right around where? Oh, yeah, it's going to be T8. Yeah. Okay. Now Jamal Bowman, new congressman from New York, 16th district, progressive. He just tweeted. Well, he didn't just tweet, but he tweeted this recently on the 11th, a couple days ago. All this backlash to defund the police. How fast are people going to fold when we get serious about reparations? And that's really what it comes down to. And I'm so encouraged to see all of these progressive members of Congress come to D.C. You've seen Cori Bush representing Missouri's 1st congressional district. So interesting. I love Cori Bush. She's so happy and so very genuine. She comes out of the Ferguson movement. It's so important to get some of these activists and organizers in Congress. Let me ask you, Marcus, is that the best place for people who are able to organize and mobilize folks? I know that there are fights to be fought on different fronts. What is your thoughts about Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, and similar progressives really kicking ass and making their way to Congress to be sworn in for January?
I know Cori Bush. She's not going to fold. She doesn't even know how to be a neoliberal. Like that, it's not in her. So it's perfect, right? Because they're going to hit brick walls as the Progressive Caucus, which, by the way, the Progressive Caucus is the fastest growing caucus in DC right now. She's not going to fold. I don't know Brother Jamal, but for Brother Jamal to actually be going into Congress and actually say on his Twitter page the word reparations, like he said it, right? It shows that there's a difference between time, and it shows that he is a person that is willing to go to bat for his ideals. So I'm not mad at that at all. And I have a deeper and broader statement that Taure brought up, and it's about this right here. If you guys show me a Republican that If y'all can show me one Republican that supports Black Lives Matter, that supports even police reform, like the conservative view of the conservative side of all of this, and supports Black liberation in general, then that's a Republican that needs to be serving in the Biden administration. But I'm sorry, if you can show me that Republican, I'll wait for it.
Who is it? Is it Kasich? Who else? Who else is one of them?
It's not one. So they can't do it, Kim. So how you can't have Black liberation and the Lincoln Project at the same table. I'm sorry, that's not going to work.
Come on. Taure, let me hit you with this question, and then we're going to move on to the next part of our discussion. You know, is there a potential split, like a legitimate split divide between the squad sort of progressives of House Democrats and the establishment, Clyburn, Pelosi's of the establishment Democrat? Are we finally going to see the progressive caucus? As Marcus said, they're adding members at a quicker pace. Are we going to see these people get away from the Democratic Party, like as a whole? Because clearly our interests are not diverging with what the party's interests are, and these progressive candidates really were extremely successful during this recent campaign. So the people are speaking and responding to a progressive agenda at the ballot box.
Yeah, I always try to frame this in a thought process. You know, I look at the United States as an empire. That's what it is. It's a settler colonial empire. So as I think from that perspective, right, this empire is falling. It's declining. The United States, I've been talking about this for a long time, not the only one. It's falling. So you're seeing the splits among the ruling class, and that is being reflected within the electoral system. So right now, yeah, this old guard is kind of falling, but I'm not so quick to think that, you know, the whoever's going to take power over the ruling class next as the empire falls won't kind of adjust and adopt and move and try to move these progressive people and either move them out of the way or either kind of embrace them, co-opt them. And some of them I don't think will be able to be co-opted, but they will also find themselves living in kind of contradiction, because the way this kind of whole society is organized is not to give people the things that they need. It is about inequality. It is about oppression. It is about injustice. And if we look through kind of history, right, even after the 60s, when you had a lot of Black politicians move in, especially in local politics, that didn't necessarily mean that we were moved in a more progressive way. In Philly, when you got a Black mayor, they still dropped the bomb on Black folks, right? And he was the one that kind of signed off on it. You can look, across the board, even now, all these quote unquote people that we have, even on the local scale. Well, what I will say is this: I wonder if those folks like AOC, like Cori Bush, even Jamal Bowman, I think, are they going to find themselves and embrace the Democratic Party if it doesn't, keep to what they say? Are they going to go out and join the Green Party? Are they going to form some other kind of party? I don't know if people are going to do that. I thought Bernie maybe had the best opportunity to bring a mass of people around to a next party, but I can't say that I knew a party that had the infrastructure available to bring them in. So that's just kind of where I'm at with it.
Okay. Well,
Can I say something to Taure real quick?
Yes, by all means.
Taure, it is an empire, and maybe this is a very selfish Black man statement, but I want to be an equal citizen in the empire at some point, right? And I know that's wrong, and maybe you can school me on that right there. But since we've been second class for such a long time, and it's an empire, at least we can fight for an equal seat at the table at this damn empire that they got going on. Because you're right, it is an empire, and Indigenous Americans and African Americans have been left out of the at the big table with the king and queen for a very long time. And instead of getting the crumbs, maybe being at the table would do something. I know there's a hyper optimistic view, but if I have to go through the empire thought process to stop us getting killed from police, right, and be seen as equal or actually thrive in America, then that's when I'll have a different thought process about it. But I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater just yet, because at some point there's still going to be an election unless we overthrow the Constitution. That's just, I don't know what you think about that, but that's how I'm thinking.
Yeah, I can touch on it real quick. I think it's important to not, when we talk about thinking about a different world, a different society, living outside of the empire, right? It's also important to think about what do you have in front of you now that can either set the conditions to help us get to that point, and also improve our conditions immediately right now. So it's not a call to like disengage, not to vote, not to kind of even support these kind of progressive causes, right? So if you're trying to get, for instance, you're trying to get marijuana decriminalized federally, or, I'm down with that. I'm not going to be like, hell the fuck no, don't do that shit, right? And if there's going to be people and organizations in place to do that, because what happens? I'm the one getting arrested. I'm the one happening with that. But always with the foresight in mind that freedom will never happen. For instance, for me, Black liberation and United States can't coexist, because the United States was founded to be fundamentally anti-Black, anti-poor, anti-woman, all of these things. It's rooted into the structure. So I keep that in mind, but not to say that I don't engage, but also understanding that any engagement I have, like Audre Lorde says, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house, right? I'm fine with getting redecorating, making some shit better. Maybe we get some better beds. I can sleep now in a better room. I'm fine with that at the time being, but always understanding like, yo, I'm going to burn this shit down and build my own fucking house with people who want to live in a certain kind of way.
You got to kick James Clyburn out the house first, because
he's fucking gone. He's fucking gone.
He's Steven from Django in the house. What you doing touching Master Two?
Man, listen. I am so optimistic and hopeful for the new incoming members of Congress. Again, I'm kind of with you, Taure. Like, it's like, okay, I don't expect Congress or a president or the Supreme Court or anything to sort of fix our condition. But given the situation that is in front of us, if these people are going to go to the people's house and stand in support of progressive issues, I just hope they just don't join the Congressional Black Caucus. I feel like that's where Black radicals go to get neutered, especially. And not to say that Congress, that we're electing a whole bunch of Black radicals in the first place, because we're not. But I hope that they don't subscribe to what the CBC generally stands for. And I find them to be really in opposition of helping Black people move along. Like, I don't think the CBC really does a very good job of advocating for us. Dwayne, do we have that trailer ready? Okay. Well, okay. Well,
hey, Kim, can I say something real quick?
Please.
Just about,
yes, thank you.
Yeah, just about the ones in Congress, Cori Bush and them. I do hope really that they start to build an international kind of analysis with Black folks across the world and how the United States is oriented towards them. So I hope they start looking at, building relationships with Africa and other places like that, and not get into the military bullshit. I say that too. I needed to plug that part.
I think also there has to be a stoppage. There should be like some kind of pledge made by Black progressives who identify as progressives that say, I, candidate so-and-so, when they get elected, officially swear off trying to sit at the front row of the CBC Awards Gala. I, as a Black progressive, refuse to sell my community out so I can have 3 CNN hits a week. I'm just saying, like, there should be some kind of guarantees that we get here, man.
All right, y'all. We're going to move along in the program because, we talk about a coup in sort of a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, but a coup has actually already happened on American soil. Pop up that tweet, Dwayne. Can we get a tweet from the Equal Justice Initiative? So this week marked the anniversary. I think it was November 10th. 1898 is when the Wilmington coup occurred in Wilmington, North Carolina, where a gang of angry whites took over the city government. A biracial government was elected into office in Wilmington. Mobs of armed white supremacists invaded Wilmington City Hall in North Carolina and forced everyone to resign. The mob also destroyed Black businesses and killed dozens of Black people. And I'm sure that you were not taught about this in school. That is not surprising. A lot of people weren't taught the Tulsa uprisings either, and a number of other instances in the United States where racial hatred was a motivator, Black and Indigenous people and Latinx people murdered and killed by white supremacy. So today, to kind of give us some historical context about what the Wilmington coup was all about back in 1898. Today we are joined with Christopher Everett. Chris is the director of a documentary called Wilmington on Fire. About the instances that happened in Wilmington. He is based in Durham. He's also producer and director of the award-winning documentary, again, Wilmington on Fire. He is the founder and president of Speller Street Films in North Carolina. And today we're also joined with Blake Hill Saya. Blake is the author of Aaron McDuffie Moore, an African-American physician, educator, and founder of Durham's Black Wall Street, which is a biography about her great-great-grandfather, and it's being published on the UNC Press. She's also a writer and storytelling coach based in Los Angeles. We are so grateful to have you both join us today and give us a history lesson, something that is very much needed in these times for historical context. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you hear us okay?
Okay, wonderful. Okay, excellent. So Chris, can we get started with you and talk to us about what happened this same week of November in 1898? But I guess tell us what happened beforehand. How did we even get a biracial city government elected in Wilmington, North Carolina in the late 1800s? That sounds awfully progressive for the times and for the location.
Yeah, yes it is. Wilmington in the 1890s, it was the main city in North Carolina back then. A lot of people who are familiar with the state of North Carolina, Charlotte, Raleigh are like the big cities. But back in the 1890s, Wilmington was that place to be. It was North Carolina's largest city at the time. And it was very welcoming to African Americans during this time as well. And how African Americans got in political power throughout North Carolina, several places in North Carolina, but specifically to Wilmington, was because of this thing called fusion politics, where you had Black folks who were Republican at the time merged and joined forces with, white folks that kind of were dissatisfied with what the Democratic Party were doing at the time, and they just merged together to kind of put their people in office. They figured out that, hey, even though you're Black, I'm white, we have similar interests. We all want good schools for our kids. We all want to start businesses, and we want to get involved in politics. So they created this thing called fusion. And with this fusion movement, they were able to put their people in office, especially in Wilmington. And so there was also a white supremacist movement that was already there that really stemmed from the Civil War. And those folks really didn't like that, and they really wanted to change that to bring Wilmington and the state of North Carolina back to that era before the Civil War. And that's when the massacre happened, and then the actual overthrow of the government in Wilmington.
Blake, talk to us about what was present in the Black part of Durham at the time that the coup actually took place, and what was taken away after the mob was done their murderous rampage. I mean, that's not hyperbole. That's exactly what happened.
Well, just to be clear, this happened the murders happened in Wilmington. Durham did not experience. Durham did not experience this kind of violence. But the story in Durham is quite interesting as well. So to set the stage, I think has already been set very well. What the aftermath of it was certainly the beginning of the end of Black participation in politics in the South for another 90 years. I think it's important to acknowledge that there were Black sheriffs, Black police officers, Black judges, Black lawyers, Black business owners. The entire city government was a radical Republican government. It's really important, before we even really go much into the politics here, to absolutely make the point that the radical Republican Party of this time was the party of Lincoln, was the party of emancipation, was the party of abolitionists, Northern ideas, what the Southern planter class called scalawags and carpetbaggers, and also Black folks who voted to have participation and to have their rights upheld by the post-Civil War Reconstructionist ideals. So radical Republicans were what we might call even today the Progressive Party. And the Democratic Party was the party of the Southern Democratic white planter class who wanted to uphold the old mores of the South, who wanted the races divided and Black people subjugated, who were white supremacists, plain and simple. And in the lead up to this 1898 coup, which it absolutely was the only successful political coup in American history, they widely publicized nationwide, including all the way up to the White House, their intentions to have this coup, their white supremacist agenda. The North Carolina Democratic Party Convention Handbook, in fact, even called it a white supremacist agenda that they had. Their number one tool was to sow discord between those who had made fusionist politics happen through the two elections prior to 1898, which had put that party very much in power. They were bent on sowing racial discord in order to do that, in order to get particularly the white Southern poorer farmer and working class folks to pull away from their allyship with Black leaders who were frankly more focused on them getting better services and better education for their kids, et cetera, than the Democrats were, the Southern Democrats. So their number one handbook goal was to sow racial discord. And they did that in the papers. They did it through political cartoons for those folks who were not literate. Many of the poorer white classes were not literate. So they came up with some pretty hideous cartoons all about Negro rule. Lots of big, burly looking Black folks in spats for some reason. That was a big deal. Stepping on the necks of white people and, picturing them as animals and just these predatory creatures that were trying to take over not only the government, but the safety and virtue of white women's bodies. And this was an agenda that was, repeated over and over again from the spring all the way through November of 1898 to foment this kind of feeling. And it worked. It absolutely worked. It was a news campaign. It was an on-the-ground campaign. There were picnics and parades and all kinds of activities for the family in Wilmington, for white families to get together and talk about how white supremacy was the future. It's really very chilling to go through this kind of research and read that this happened on American soil, but it most certainly did. And it was very much framed as actual, American patriotism was framed as the purview of white supremacy, and that to be white was to be American, and everyone else was excluded from that picture of what being truly American and patriotic was. And we see, lots of echoes of this in current politics. In fact, there was a force out in the streets leading up to the election, actively threatening and fomenting fear in the Black community called the Red Shirts. Anybody see red hats in that? And they would go house to house and threaten people, often beat the Black members of the family who were able to vote, because remember at this time, only Black males were able to vote. So any Black male they ran into, they beat or intimidated or threatened. The white community actually even raised money to purchase a machine gun, which was state of the art, right out of the Spanish-American War. and they would demonstrate it to Black leaders in order to let them know that they had also military might on their side. It is little known that. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, not to cut you off, Blake, but I mean, that sounds extremely familiar. Please. Very similar tactics. I wanted to ask Chris another question because, I'm curious about, I think Blake was touching on this, but the role of law enforcement in this coup. How were they used to enact what the white supremacist mob was there to get in terms of the biracially elected? Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying that back then, right before the massacre, you actually had Black police officers in the city of Wilmington during this time. I know one brother that we talked to, he didn't end up in the film, but his great-great-grandfather, in the film, you see a picture of his great-great-grandfather. I think his name was David Bryant. He was a police officer prior to the massacre of 1898. And what they did was they pretty much removed a lot of these fusion folks who were aligned with the fusion movement and Republican movement, off the police force as well, So, they were able to really do what they wanted to do because they stripped a lot of these brothers, from their positions to do anything. And also during this time, which was really very interesting, that when I did my research and other folks did their research, this was around the time of, the Spanish-American War as well. And a lot of the Black soldiers, were away, during this time. So it's mighty funny that they decided to do this coup when folks that could have protected the community weren't there, at all. So, it was a very strategic thing, all the way around to really pull off this coup. For years, folks thought it was just like a spontaneous, insurrection type of thing. But, this is a very calculated coup, from top to bottom.
That also sounds familiar. A lot of echoes of 2020, sort of, I hope not being like a precursor to perhaps what we could expect for this outcome of this election. Taure, I know this is your neck of the woods, not Wilmington, but North Carolina. Do you have any questions for Chris or Blake?
Yeah, Chris, I definitely remember. I mean, I saw the film first in full frame. So okay. Shout out to Durham. At that time, definitely. What I thought about was just also the class dynamics that went on at the time when I remember watching the film. That the folks who were leading the coup, I mean, these weren't just like poor white folks who were, upset and pissed off and had economic anxiety who decided to overthrow the government, right? I feel like these were, high class white folks, the families that were in the town, some families that even maybe still exist in Wilmington today. And then also when we think about the victims, right, I remember there being a class divide among Black folks. So the richer Black folks were able to get on trains and other things like that and, go move to their families. Not to say that they weren't impacted, but the poor Black folks, basically had to head to the swamps. So basically what I'm asking you, just maybe talk a little bit about those kind of class dynamics and how they played into everything that happened.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I'll start, with the Black community in Wilmington. You had, quite a few well-off African-Americans in the city of Wilmington. And then you also had, I guess your standard working class Black person because, the ports were really big in Wilmington during that time. So like I said, a lot of people came to that town, especially African-Americans, because you can kind of get in there and get a job at the ports, and really work your way up and just provide for your family, So some of those folks that worked at the ports or did some jobs like that, they were affected, especially when the coup happened. A lot of them maybe were renters at the time. And so they just packed up and just left, because they were renting. They just said, forget this, I'm out of here, and just moved to, some folks moved to Durham as well. Or some people just left the whole state, in general. Some folks went to Philly, New York, a community in Cape May County called Whitesboro, so they just left. Folks with some money, they were able to get on trains and leave. Some actually stayed as well, but they knew, just to stay in their place and never really get involved in this political game ever again. So you have folks with some money that also stayed, some that were forced to leave to never to return also. And in the white community, You had a lot of these folks who were behind the coup. A lot of them were high-ranking officials in the Civil War for the Confederacy. You know what I'm saying? When you look at the major players, a lot of them were colonels, generals, lieutenants, all of that in the Confederate military, during the Civil War. And after they leave the Civil War, they get heavily involved in the Democratic Party, especially in Democratic politics. You know what I'm saying? And so they start, getting into politics. Some of them even become lawyers as well. And also a lot of them start newspapers, also. And so they were able to use the newspaper to really spread their message of white supremacy as well. So you had those folks, with money and influence at the top, really controlling the folks at the bottom, who were getting these images and messages, just like, she was saying earlier that a lot of people were illiterate during this time. And so the white supremacist movement really took advantage of that, with their newspapers and the imagery, and really, scaring people up, pretty much saying that African Americans that are in office, there's a lot of corruption going on, but the research now and the records, there was no, evidence of corruption at all. But that's the stuff they were putting out there. And also the fear of, Black men getting all the success. They're going to be sleeping with white women, your wives and your daughters. We know the story, it's same old stuff. And so they kind of used that to really rile up, your standard working class person. But at the end of the day, it never really benefited the city of Wilmington at all. Like I said, Wilmington was on this rise to be a major city in the South, but the massacre really stunted its growth. And I go to Wilmington all the time. I met my wife doing this film, and Wilmington's like a second home to me. And it's just shocking just to see what the possibilities could have been for that city. You see what I'm saying? So this white supremacy movement and this coup, it didn't even help, the average white person, because the city the growth of it just stunted. And you still see those effects to this day, especially with the African American population. This group of guys we recently interviewed, because I'm doing a follow-up to Wilmington on Fire called Wilmington on Fire Chapter 2. And this group, they've been collecting all this data, this historical research, and also a lot of disparities that are in Wilmington today. And they were like the medium income between Blacks and whites is just very large. White family, I think, averages probably about $69,000 a year. African Americans in Wilmington is like 25,000. You know what I'm saying? So in the population, African American population in Wilmington is, it's well under 20%. And that, I think the white population is about 75%. And so you can see those lasting effects that not only, across racial lines, but just the city as a whole as well.
Blake, I wanted to ask you, I used to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and was not aware of the Tulsa massacre and the destruction or even existence of Black Wall Street until I went to the city and went to the wonderful cultural center that they have there in Greenwood. And what I learned was, one of the disturbing facts that I learned about what happened in Tulsa was the intentional cover-up by the white power structure, even when it happened. Newspapers that had covered the event, they were all destroyed. Like, it's very difficult to find period coverage of the Tulsa massacre. And I'm wondering, was there a similar thing that happened with the Wilmington coup? Was there a deliberate attempt to erase what happened? Because clearly it's not taught in schools. Is it even taught in North Carolina schools? How was this event memorialized by the people who basically made it happen?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I think it's a really important distinction between Wilmington and Tulsa. Wilmington was a politically motivated, although also racially motivated, and very well planned, and actually in plain sight telegraphed event. They basically said what they were going to do. It was known what was going to happen all the way up to the White House, and McKinley was in the White House at the time. And my ancestor, George Henry White, who was black sitting member of Congress at the time, went and met with him and told him that this was going to happen. Black pastors got together and went and told him this was going to happen. They went after it happened and asked for a federal response. None came. It was a political moment in which it seems like McKinley chose getting reelected over perhaps taking any kind of action that would align with his, outward beliefs that seemed to have been abolitionist. He was a Republican candidate. It just, no help came. This Tulsa, was a bit more. It happened later than this. First of all, this happened first. Tulsa happened in, I believe, 1921. And it was much more along the lines of a powder keg that was looking for a spark and was touched off by the usual kind of race riot kindling, which was usually the accusal, white women accusing black men of misconduct. It was an elevator operator that apparently did something to a white girl that has never really been substantiated. That's what happened in Tulsa. But it was probably, it was obviously a powder keg waiting to happen. And it was much more about economics there because the black community was doing extremely well. They had their own everything on their side of town, and they were doing it better than the white side of town, and that wasn't sitting well. And so that was much more about prosperity and economic situation than it was specifically about politics. In Wilmington, it was a planned political coup. The two elections that led up to 1898 were making white folks in North Carolina very nervous that they were not going to be able to turn the tables and reverse the effects of the physical battlefield that they lost in the Civil War. And they knew that they were going to have to make a move to reestablish themselves as dominant in order to bureaucratically reverse the Civil War's on paper emancipation, but they were going to do it, reverse that bureaucratically. If they were going to do that, they had to make a move in this election. They knew it was critical. They telegraphed that they were going to do so in the news, and following right afterwards, because they had built this story that black folks were going to riot on election day, that black folks were stockpiling weapons. Black folks were trying to take over the government in Wilmington and shame the white man and rape the white women, and all of these, talking points that were over and over and over again emphasized. It would be also, I would be very lax in not mentioning Alexander Manly, who was a black journalist at the time, a very progressive voice who pushed all of the Reconstructionist era ideas from his black newspaper, the Daily Record. And he got in a bit of a tangle with a white lady, high society white lady, who had come out and said, if we are going to basically control these beasts, like black men, we should just lynch one every day until they learn their lesson. Well, Alexander Manly came out and said in a published memo that if you're going to sit on your high horse and talk about rapists, then perhaps you should talk to your white men who are raping black women and have for hundreds of years, including my mother by my white father. And by the way, these black beasts that you like to talk about lynching are certainly sufficient enough for you all to fall in love with. If we're going to be honest about what's really going on, there are plenty of white girls falling in love with and willingly enjoying relations with black men. So it was that alone was pushed as a huge talking point. Alexander Manly was told that he was going to be lynched on the day of the action of the violence. They burnt the Daily Record. They went looking for him. Luckily, he got out of town. So that was part of that rhetoric. So they had built a story leading up to the event that white people were going to be, victorious in putting down this riot. They then, after the event, publicized it as a Black riot and publicized themselves as the victors, saving, democracy and white women's safety going forward. And that was literally the night of, I think, already in the newspapers nationwide. That was the story. And if you look in textbooks, public school textbooks, all the way up until 1973, this event was couched in the fact that it was a race riot and that, nobler and smarter white heads prevailed and restored, order and put down the insurrection. So it was public relations as well as a telegraphed event in plain sight.
Yeah. Just incredible information there. And for everyone that's watching, it takes a lot of intention, and we've all been conditioned to sort of couch these events as race riots. That is not what happened, okay? Yeah. Black people were minding their business and racist white people came to tear shit up. So that's not a race riot. That does not a race riot make. So we all have to sort of be intentional with that language. I'm trying to make myself say uprisings and massacres as opposed to race riots because it's just sort of a default thing to say. But thank you very much for pointing that out, Blake. I'd like to thank you both so much for taking some time to share this very troubling yet important and contextual history with us. These are things that in stories that most people in America are not told. We have to go find these stories out for ourselves. So I appreciate you guys coming on here to share your knowledge with us. We've been speaking with author and writer and storyteller Blake Hill-Saya. She's joining us today from LA. And Christopher Everett. He is the director of Wilmington on Fire. It's available on Vimeo. Christopher, where else can people find Wilmington on Fire? I'm going to check this out this weekend, by the way.
Yeah, you can check it on Vimeo. It's on Amazon Prime as well. And also, if you want to keep it Black owned, we on Quelle TV also. So all three of those platforms. And you can go to WilmingtonOnFire.com, and there's a link to everywhere you can see it. And be on the lookout for part. We're currently filming that. We've been filming that for about a year now. So it's like looking at Wilmington, over 120 years later.
We will be looking out for that. And thank you both for the work that you've been doing on this very important historical moment that more of us need to know about and still discuss. So thank you both for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Taure and Marcus, are you gentlemen still there with us? I wanted to just close kind of quickly and just kind of get your opinion based off, this wonderful history lesson that we just received from both Blake and Chris, and how to sort of contextualize that into what we're seeing in 2020, because I heard like a lot of overlapping things, to be perfectly honest, from the Trump people talking about the illegitimacy of the vote and legal votes and illegal votes, and these people shouldn't be voting and this, that, and the third. And a lot of that was similar rhetoric, propaganda from the time of 1898 when this Wilmington coup take place. Let me just get both of your reactions. Marcus, let me start with you.
They stole our freedom. They stole our independence. They stole our history. Our history has been stolen from us. And the irony is our current Secretary of Education is another person that through her books, herself and through her charter school teachings, she's trying to teach the next generation to ignore, factual things that has happened in history. So hearing that story is just another big old check mark for me about how reparations should be passed. I mean, if you don't hear that and you don't see the direct aspect of why African Americans are owed reparations from Dak to Tulsa, and I knew about that event, but I didn't hear about it in depth. And I mean, now we're talking like sort of closer to home. Mm-hmm. And then what about the towns that happened in that it wasn't recorded? That wasn't the size of Wilmington at the time. These are the things that concern me. We talk about Rosewood, we talk about Tulsa, we talk about Wilmington. We can add that to the list now, and so many other places where Black folks were lynched, lost their property. If you're not a supporter of reparations after hearing that story, then you are living in a different America than me.
Taure, this happened in your home state. I know it was not a surprise to you. You're familiar with it. But how do the echoes of what happened in the Wilmington coup of 1898 reverberate to sort of what we've been experiencing so far in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just that if you look through across this history, and something I think a lot of folks don't think about is that America finds itself in crisis constantly. So even if you're looking around the 1890s, 1877, 1893, right? You're the government, capitalism is in a crisis again. And when that happens, people start to come together and ask questions, and they start to organize, and they start to use the means that are around them. So they start to engage into the electoral process, or they even organize outside of it. And what that becomes is dangerous to the overall management and empire, right? The strength of the capitalist system and who controls it. So even when I think about these events in Wilmington, and I think about other places, they know that the best way to keep people from organizing together is to sell the hate, right? It's to give what Du Bois calls like that psychological wage of whiteness to folks. And that's really all they got, you know, and it's sad because I think about how many folks in Wilmington or North Carolina or poor white folks who do buy into this kind of Trump nationalism, white nationalism, or whatever, right? Not realizing that they are also being screwed over by the capitalist system as well, right? There's white folks in poverty all across North Carolina. And it's unfortunate for the ones who do think it's because of illegal Mexicans taking our jobs, or that, you know, it's black folks, you know, causing too much ruckus and that they're getting more attention via welfare or via, I don't know what they have materially to kind of back up that claim. But nonetheless, they're the ones kind of being screwed over. So that's what I think about in this current context, is just how some section of this ruling class still goes back to this same old, you know, kind of set of racial politics. And it works, obviously. It works. It worked at least in 2016. But again, I think that, you know, as conditions continue to worsen, as those white folks continue to be poor, can't get health care, can't get all that other shit, more and more of them are going to wake up and be like, you know what? I might hate Negroes, but you know what? I'm hungry at the same goddamn time, and they're fighting to try to get some food. So you know what? I'm going to join in with these motherfuckers, right? And then you're going to have some Fred Hampton ass people who will come through and organize their ass under socialism, and it's going to be a beautiful fucking day. I'll probably be dead by the time it happens, but I hope it happens nonetheless.
We will all be way dead by the time that happens. But my spirit will come back and celebrate the movement. Listen, y'all, that's our show. We've been in overtime. I appreciate you both hanging around and being part of this fantastic conversation. Taure Brown, Marcus Ferrell, as usual, love to see y'all smiling, glowing faces, and love to hear that shit that y'all talk. Mwah! It is the best. So thank y'all, gentlemen, for making some time today. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Burn it down.
The fire.
That's right. It's the fire. Listen, y'all, that's the show. So listen. Real quick, go to the YouTube channel, Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Click like and subscribe. I certainly appreciate it. Next week, join us on Tuesday, because we will be talking about the real winners of the election 2020. And that would be, of course, drugs. Drugs had the biggest fucking come up of anybody during the election. Marijuana did big things. Decriminalization of all kinds of drugs in Oregon doing amazing things out there in terms of progressive drug policy. And of course, mushrooms. So join us on Tuesday while we talk about how drugs were the big winner of the 2020 election. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Y'all have a great weekend. Don't forget, COVID is still very much out here jumping on people. So please wash your hands, wear your mask, social distance. Don't play games. COVID is killing people. I do not want it to kill you. Have a great weekend. See you later. Bye-bye. See you. Bye. 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 Bye.